Welcome to Which Side Wins. I'm your host, Margaret McLean from It's a Crime Media. Today we're going to be analyzing the opening statements in the Karen Read trial, and then we'll decide which side is winning. As a former prosecutor, I'll tell you opening statements are very important. It's the first time that the jury is going to hear your theory of the case, so you want to put your best foot forward. In this trial, Karen Read is about to be tried again for killing her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, by intentionally hitting him with her SUV. The theory advanced by the defense is that she never struck John O'Keefe with her vehicle. Instead, she was framed by corrupt cops. Special Prosecutor HankBrennan delivered his opening statement first because the government has the burden of proof. As I score these opening statements to determine which side wins, I'm looking for clarity, structure, simplicity. How did the attorneys highlight key pieces of evidence? Did they focus on storytelling? Did they anticipate counter arguments? And also, did they refrain from arguing in their opening statement? That's reserved for closing arguments at the end of the trial. Were their first lines memorable? Did they grab that jury? Also, were promises made that cannot be delivered. Overall, they also have to have a strong wrap up. So let's see how they did. Here's Special Prosecutor HankBrennan. He went first because the Commonwealth has the burden of proof.
At 6:04 a.m. on January 29, 2022, the alarm bell sounded in the Canton Fire Department. Firefighter paramedic Timothy Nuttall knew what that meant. His heart skipped a beat, he raced to his equipment, and he picked up his bag, which was meticulous. There was a sign and a signal, and then there was a voice commanding that there was cardiac arrest. The most serious of calls for a firefighter paramedic, that means that a person's heart has stopped. He didn't know who it was, he didn't know where it was, he took his bag, he had just gotten to the station, and he rushed to the ambulance. He was one of the most senior paramedics that morning. Another paramedic, Anthony Flannery, would be running this mission. He jumped in the back of the ambulance, the door shut, and they headed off to 34th Fairview Road. As they drove, firefighter Nuttall could not see anything. He couldn't hear anything other than the engine of the ambulance. He could feel it sliding across the road. It was near blizzard conditions. He calmed himself, he steadied himself. This is what the firefighters and paramedics are trained to do, to focus. And he focused on his task. He looked around the back of the ambulance to make sure all the tools were in place. The ambulance was meticulous as well. This was Anthony Flannery's ambulance, and it was well stocked. He calmed himself, and he thought about what was going to happen. What should he be looking for? What is his next step? He played the scenarios through his mind, and every calm was above him. As the car pulled up to 34th Fairview, the ambulance, he stood at the back door, the doors open. And he stepped out into bedlam. He could hear a woman screaming and shrieking, the cold, hard air slapping on his face, and the wind, blizzard conditions swirling around him. You will hear him tell you how he trudged towards those screams in the darkness, the snow, and when he got there, he saw 3 women surrounding a man lying, not moving on the ground. He walked up to the man, and he reached down and he tried to find any signs of life, pulse, anything. And he found nothing. And he got up and he walked over to the woman, and he walked over to that defendant, Karen Read, and he told her that he thinks that man is gone. And then he heard the yell from Anthony Flannery, the chief, and he said, "Come back, let's go." Because you'll learn that in the cold evening, somebody's heart stops. Even if they're presumed to have passed, sometimes you can still save a life. So you'll see on a dash cam video, you'll hear from testimony, he went back to that man who's John O'Keefe. He went back to him, and that crew, coordinated effort, they did everything they could to save his life. They got on their knees, they began CPR, and firefighter Nutter will explain as he kneeled over John O'Keefe. He looked up, and the defendant approached him, and you'll see it on the video. Now, he wanted any information, because when you're trying to save someone, you want to know, are they on drugs, medication, do they have a heart condition? And he looked up at Miss Reed, and he said, what happened? And you'll hear her words through firefighter Nuttall. She said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And it was at that time, through the words of the defendant, that she admitted what she had done that night, that she hit John O'Keefe.
Here's the beginning of Attorney Ellen Jackson's opening statement. You compare, tell me what you think.
The evidence in this case will establish above everything else 3 points. There was no collision with John O'Keefe. There was no collision. There was no collision. John O'Keefe did not die from being hit by a vehicle. Period. The facts will show that. The evidence will show that. The data will show that. The science will show that. And the experts will tell you that. You'll learn that the Commonwealth has pinned its entire case on a brazen and a flawed assertion that is untethered, unconnected to the facts and to the evidence. And their assertion is contrary to science. Because at the end of the day, folks, there was no collision with John O'Keefe. So how did we end up here? How does Karen Reed end up sitting in that chair on trial for an event that literally never happened? Well, the evidence is going to explain it. And it can be summed up in the following text message at the very beginning of this investigation. A text message of a now fired Massachusetts State Police officer named Michael Proctor. He was the lead investigator on this case, and he was talking about a fellow officer, a fellow cop, who owned the property where John O'Keefe's body was found. Text message with a buddy. Question, is the homeowner going to catch any shit? Answer, nope. He's a Boston cop too.
In my opinion, defense attorney Ellen Jackson scored higher in the very beginning of the opening statements. He started out with a bang. He engaged the jury right away, and he was a bit more captivating. On the flip side, HankBrennan's style was a little less emotional, but can also be considered impactful. He may not be as engaging as Attorney Jackson, yet there's something very trustworthy about him.
When the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe were in front of 34 Fairview Road, all the way to the left side in a dark corner near a flagpole, you will learn that Mr. O'Keefe got out of the car. He got out, and he stood by the side of the road after an argument with the defendant. That argument, that anger fueled by heavy intoxication, you will learn from the science and data as he stood by the side of the road, the defendant and her SUV drove away. She drove at least 35 feet away. The argument was over. It had ended. But then she stopped. She stopped. She put the Lexus into neutral, and she waited. And the facts and the science and data will tell you that despite the fact the argument was over, she then put the Lexus into reverse, put her foot on the gas pedal, and began to press, not 25%, not 50%, up to 75% acceleration. There was a light dusting of snow. The Lexus tires spun backwards. She went backwards at least 70 feet. She clipped John O'Keefe. He fell backwards, hit his head, broke his skull, and there he lay at the corner of Fairview Road, on the ground, lying on top of his cell phone, alone.
I like that part, and you'll notice Brennan didn't use any notes during his entire opening statement. Also, he was very good at arguing the facts and the scientific data. For example, Brennan pointed to John O'Keefe's cell phone data. The temperature of the phone went down from the time Karen left him at 34 Fairview, which is evidence that the phone never went inside the house. It stayed outside because it stayed cold, and it was under John O'Keefe's body the entire time. That's significant, and it wasn't brought up during the last trial. Here's Alan Jackson again. He does a great job focusing on a sloppy police investigation, corrupt police officer, especially Trooper Michael Proctor, with his vulgar text messages, and he raises reasonable doubt by making it look like everyone's related, the Alberts and ATF agent Higgins, and they were all in some big conspiracy to frame Karen Reed. He doesn't exactly say that, but he strongly implies it. Take a listen.
That quote defines the lack of integrity of the Commonwealth's entire case, its entire investigation, and this prosecution. During the course of this trial, you'll learn much more about Mr. Proctor, why he said that, and what it really means. What you'll see and hear in this courtroom in the coming weeks is not just a story of a tragic loss. And make no mistake, John O'Keefe's death is and was a tragic loss. But the story you'll hear is about an investigation that was riddled with errors from the beginning, a rush to judgment, conflicted and corrupted from the start. Corrupted by bias, corrupted by incompetence, and corrupted by deceit. Finally, it was corrupted by a deliberate effort to avoid and to cover up the very truth that you are seeking. You'll find when you hear the evidence that the Commonwealth's case is the literal definition of reasonable doubt. They won't be able to talk their way out of it. They won't be able to explain their way out of it. They won't be able to excuse their way out of it. And they can't meet their extreme burden of proof, which the court will tell you is beyond any and all reasonable doubt.
Overall, both attorneys did a stellar job in their opening statement. But the win goes to Alan Jackson because he delivered more of a punch. I'm your host, Margaret McLean. Thank you for listening to Which One Wins. Be sure to subscribe so you can find out who's winning tomorrow.